Chuck, I want to be clear that this podcast started maybe 5 minutes ago, and now I just pressed record. Does that sound about right to you?
That's about right, Marty. And hey, we've got a studio audience again.
We got a studio audience, and man, did we hit a question.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so in our studio audience segment, we were talking about how people experience and come to Remembrance Day.
Right.
And I asked you if I told you about my experience from last Remembrance Day. I don't believe it's been on this podcast, but I'm going to share it very quickly right now. And that is, last year we had a whole conversation at Thanksgiving about the wearing of poppies.
Yes.
It was quite the conversation about who wears them, who doesn't wear them, how the decline in the wear of poppies. If I just stand on the bus, which I do every morning going to work, I can see who's got them and just count how fewer year after year poppies are being worn.
Right.
Because I think the meaning of poppy has somehow been changed over the last while.
Mm-hmm.
So in listening to that conversation, my 6-year-old granddaughter was like, I'm wearing a poppy. Took a stance. Right. And I'm going to go to the celebration this year, and my no-no is going to take me.
Right.
Okay, great. And I did. And when we got in the car on the day of, her mother was feeling ill that day, so she stayed home, and it was just me and my 6-year-old granddaughter. And she started by saying, so are you all ready for the Remember Party? And I went, Remember Party? And it took a minute, but that's what a 6-year-old would come up with from Remembrance Day celebration.
Agreed.
It's a Remember Party.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, okay, I will never forget Remember Party for the rest of my life. And then she asked a really good question, which was like, could you ever forget having been there? Why do you need to go to the Remember Party? 6 years old, right? You can't make this stuff up.
Wisdom from the mouth of babes.
That's right. Because you're right, honey. I could never forget.
Right.
But it's not just about me and the remembering. It's about the celebration of the remembering. Mm-hmm. And what I think she was having trouble when we were actually at the ceremony was she's like, this doesn't feel like a party.
Yeah.
This feels like a mourning.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with a mourning, but that's not what we said we were going to do today. We said there was going to be a party. Is there something at McDonald's afterwards?
Where's the cake? No.
That's right. Where's this doesn't seem to have celebration in it.
Yes.
And before we were online, we were talking about that space between, are we celebrating on Remembrance Day or are we mourning on Remembrance Day? And is there something missing in that space? And so I never told you that story before.
No.
We pressed record.
Yes.
When you look at your next Remember Party.
Yes. Something I will not forget now.
And you ask, if you can't forget, why are we celebrating?
Yeah.
Chuck, why are we celebrating?
Well, as I was discussing with our studio audience while you took a short break, we, in the last couple of decades, we've moved from funerals to celebrations of life. And as far as November the 11th goes, we seem to be trapped in the past. We seem to be trapped in the funereal aspect of remembering. We celebrate their lives, but only by remembering them, and the things that they did while they were with us, but not in a joyous way, in a mournful, in a sad way. Remembrance Day is always very sad for me because, I remember soldiers and officers that I had who died. I am grateful that, my sons survived the war. My father-in-law survived a series of wars, all of those things. But it's not a celebration in the way that, as we mentioned in a previous podcast, in the way that Veterans Day is in the States, right? It's not a big party that says, we are so lucky to have these people who are willing to spend their lives in uniform to keep us safe if required, right? That's a whole different issue, right? We've talked about aspects of that, whether the Americans are obsessed with security, right? We've talked about that briefly. We are not. We feel safe, more or less. But the Canadian Forces is there for a reason. It's not just another federal agency that issues you clothing, right? You can be a civil servant. You don't get issued clothing, but when you join the military, they give you everything. They feed you, they give you clothing, they tell you where to be, they tell you where to sleep, they tell you when to sleep, right? But that's the wrong way to look at it. And so we need to do a better job, as we discussed in a previous podcast, celebrating that aspect. So, the question that came back from our studio audience is in a way feedback was, okay, well, Marty asked you how you would change the education aspect of Remembrance Day. And I kind of struggled with the answer. Break it into 2 days, spend some time teaching it in schools, moving a little bit away from the mourning towards the celebrating. It's a complex issue that I think we need to address. I don't pretend to have a solution for you right now, but just starting the conversation is, I think, a great beginning.
Yeah. In the same way, poppies seem to have changed their meaning. I think there's a meaning to Remembrance Day that has remained unaltered. And that the meaning as it relates to your average Canadian, war has evolved, service has evolved, our celebrations have evolved, our Remembrance Day ceremonies probably look the same if I go back and check out what Trudeau Sr. or maybe even Diefenbaker was doing back in the day.
Yeah, you're right.
And that might have been appropriate in its time and space and place, but it's not connecting today.
No.
And so in a world where we have TikTok and Instagram, I'm naming all the social medias I'm not on and have never touched. How do we, again, look at the meaning of it? Because I think the meaning in general is some sort of glorification of war. And nobody unglorifies war like a soldier.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So soldiers are the least willing to glorify, in general, your healthy average soldier is not glorifying war.
Right.
But we should be glorifying service. And I think there's a disconnect here between the war and the actions that we did it and the service and the sacrifice required for that space. And as I talk about that disconnect between war and service, what comes up for you, Chuck?
A conversation I had with some university students at a presentation about NATO sometime back. And these were bright master's students, mostly at Queen's University in Ontario. And they knew an awful lot about NATO. They knew an awful lot about the Canadian Forces, militaries in general. But I made a comment during the discussion that said, what do you think we do all day? And that puzzled them. What do you mean? You prepare for war. But what does that mean? There wasn't a clear answer for them in their minds. And I dare say if we stopped recording and stepped outside on this sunny day and use all kinds of people walking by the house and said to them, we have a question, what do you think the military does all day? And I think the answer would be manifold, but I don't think anybody would get it right. Because what we do all day, as you know, is we practice, educate, and train. All day, every day, right? And it's not just educate, practice, and train to kill people. That's not what we do.
No.
We develop skills, we develop leadership, we develop organizational skills, expertise in all sorts of aspects. That is a 360 military. And I think that The Canadian public needs to know that. The Canadian public needs to understand that first of all, it's an honorable profession. It's an honorable way for you to spend 3 years on a basic engagement, 9 years on a short-term engagement, a full life of service, what it means to wear a uniform. And that includes police officers, that includes firefighters, that includes EMT, right, emergency medical teams. They're all lives of service. But what distinguishes the military is we have an ability, we have a responsibility that no other uniform service has. And what is that? We get to spend the lives of our members.
Mm.
Right? If you're a firefighter, you don't get to spend the life of a brother firefighter or a sister firefighter, right? Same with police officers. They don't get to spend the lives of their brother officers, sister officers. We do. Because whether you're a corporal leading a section or a major general leading a division, you get to give an order that you know people are going to not come back from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complex situation that it's not just that we do a bad job. In some cases, we don't do any job of educating the public on what we do.
Yeah, it's funny. As you said it, I'll tell you what came to mind for me. There was two things, and you certainly have like really gone into one, which is train every day. But my brain also went to the other side too, which is either you're in theater or you're practicing for theater.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Because let's not forget, while we're practicing, there's a bunch of people, whether you know it or not, in various places in the world today,
Yes.
Whether we are at war or not, does not mean that the Canadian military is not making influence somewhere in the world right now.
Absolutely. Every day.
Every day we have people in various theaters conducting various operations. And I want to be clear that some of those theaters are international and some of those theaters are domestic. That when we have the incident that's happening, our next fire, our next flood, our next disaster, that training is meant for either one of those theaters.
So you just prompted a discussion I had when both our boys were in Afghanistan, discussing with some peace-loving neighbors back in Toronto, my parents' neighbors, who they were torn. They didn't want to insult me because they knew that I had sons who were in a war zone, but they didn't really like the idea of Canada being in a war zone. Why were we there? And I said to them, well, they're not there just to look around and kill it. That's not what they do all day, right? What they do is they help the local population get rid of an element in their society that they can't get rid of by themselves. So one of the things that made big headlines in this country the whole time we were overseas, and you were there as well,
Mm-hmm.
and was the fact that we built schools for girls.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But we somehow lost the linkage between, okay, we have combat engineers who are building schools, but in order for those combat engineers to build those schools in that village, we've got combat soldiers and we've got aircraft and ships at sea that are wrapping themselves around this society, because without us, those combat engineers can never build the schools and the schools can never open for the girls. It's a much more nuanced, full 360 environment.
Yeah. And I like the way you brought that up because, there tends to be a thought that everybody who puts a uniform on is carrying a rifle into battle. And our infanteers are incredibly important, and I would never want to take away from that importance, but they are a part of a bigger system. So right near where my forward operating base was in Afghanistan, we were just clicks down the road from the KPRT, the Kandahar Provincial Reconstruction Team.
Yes.
And the KPRT is making it possible for people to have access to better roads, making it possible for them to have access to better water. This is part of the game. The game is not manifold point, target, that way, fire. It's what do we need to do in the systems and community around us, internationally or here, for, and I'm going to use this term, Canadian interests.
Yes.
And well, we can put diplomats all over the world and be like, oh, Canadian interests, we get it. When we put military all over the world and go Canadian interests, I think your average Canadian goes, why is that? Why is that, Chuck?
Well, I think we have to wear that as ex-military, that we didn't give it enough thought. We didn't, and the thought that we did give it was perhaps poorly thought out. Maybe we didn't see it as our job. Mhm. I don't know how much time we have left, Mark.
10 minutes.
Okay. So one of my favorite postings ever was when I was directing staff at the Army Staff College. So what a directing staff is an instructor.
Yes.
Right? So once a year, we had a luncheon that we invited all of the landowners in and around Greater Kingston to the officers' mess, and we wined them and we dined them. All of the directing staff, Commandant was there. And some of them were farmers, some of them were just people who owned houses with large tracts of land, some of them were businesses. And each of us would host a table, and I hosted a table for 10. And so I had this one gentleman he was wonderful. He was older, and he had been letting the Army Staff College use his farmland for us to walk across and stand and pretend to fight across for 30 years. And he had no idea why we did this every year. We did this twice a year, every year for 30 years. And he said, well, Colonel, this isn't the first one I've come to, but you seem to, be able to explain things. Can you explain to me why you, and I said, okay, all right, great question. Let me put it to you this way. I said, so you live to the northwest of Kingston, and further west is the city of Napanee. Yes. I said, okay. So the village that you live in is sort of in the orbit of Kingston, but in the lesser orbit of Napanee. Imagine, if you will, that the city of Napanee decided that it was going to attack the city of Kingston physically and kill people. And he's wide-eyed, and I said, no, just it's fantasy, but let's, humor me. So as they started attacking us, we would rise up and rush to meet them, and we would probably end up on your property fighting. And here's where what we do with our students comes in, because imagine now that the city of Belleville decided to back the city of Napanee. So now you've got two cities and all of their resources coming across the Napanee River and onto our territory, and we're overwhelmed. So we have to start fighting on the move. So we get Gananoque to help. Their 5,000 inhabitants. Well, everybody needs to be fed every day. Everybody needs to have water every day. We need sewage every day. We need bullets. People are going to get hurt. People are going to die. They need to be buried. They need to be moved back to hospitals. This thing moves every day. Somebody has to know how to do all that. Not just the fighting, not just the shooting, not just the killing, but all of the other stuff. Planning ahead. What do we need for tomorrow? Are we going to move to a new location? Do we need to move our hospital because they're getting too close? And maybe they're going to bomb our hospital against the law, but they're going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. I said, that's what we do when we're walking across your land. And these students arrive having no idea how any of that works, with being able to do all of that. It takes 6 months, and we work them like rented mules.
I like that. And I like that transformation piece you added at the end there about when you start. I've always been fascinated with earthquake and earthquake response. Mm-hmm. And I certainly was a LUSAR member for 14 years of my serving years.
Tell everybody about LUSAR.
Light Urban Search and Rescue. And so when
as opposed to HUSAR.
Yes. Heavy. As opposed to heavy urban search and rescue, or even SAR, our wonderful team in the orange jumpsuits who can do anything, anywhere, and crash your plane anywhere on this country, and they will figure out a way to get to you.
They will come.
An orange jumpsuit will meet you.
Yeah.
I don't know how, much like you said,
Yeah.
you don't know how sometimes, but 6 months, they're going to run you until you figure it out.
Yeah.
And when it comes to earthquake response, living here on Vancouver Island, knowing what I know about, hey, Chuck, do you like surfing or have you ever surfed? Because Tofino is awesome.
Yeah.
And why is Tofino awesome?
Because of the surf.
Because the earthquakes that are happening 20K off of it's, there's a reason Tofino has such an amazing surf culture. It's the amount of earthquakes that are happening just beside it.
Japan. All the way across the Pacific.
We got lots of stuff there. And most people don't understand earthquakes until you understand it. And once you run through it, you can't walk by any building ever without seeing the faults and the crack lines in the exterior again. And you're like, that's going to fall this way. That's going to pancake. That's going to collapse this way. You see the world differently after you have that knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
And everywhere I go every day, I'm like, oh, earthquake happens. Okay. Building 2 times the distance. What's the space safe? You can't see the world but anything but. And what you just described was exactly that for how we train for combat, for how we train for the big space of that. And it does take at least, it takes 6 months to become functional.
Yeah.
And then you have to get good. Yeah. And we keep coming back. But your average person doesn't understand that. And that's okay to not understand that. But I come back to, and you said this earlier and I loved it, which is we didn't do a good job of explaining this. But I'll come back to earthquakes. If earthquakes have done a good job or haven't done a good job, it has nothing to do with the person who's actually Lusar, Husar, or Sar, because they're too busy doing it.
Yes.
It needs to be a team beside that saying, hey, everybody, that looks important.
Right.
And I think to some degree, I think that's what we're talking about. That while CF does have its, we do have our members that are looking after our public affairs and advertising are not the same thing.
No, exactly. No, they're not.
Okay. And what I'm hearing here is if we want a better education of what Canada does, we need to advertise in a bigger and better educational or public serving way.
More understanding.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Okay.
You're right.
So with 3 minutes left, please tell us how we're going to do that.
Oh my, 3 minutes left. Well, I think that in spite of our complaints, I think that the leadership that we have currently in the Canadian Armed Forces has begun to appreciate that. The money that's been flowing into the department, I think, helps them. I think you see, certainly here in Esquimalt, you see the Admiral constantly. You tend to think, well, the Admiral's watching the fleet. No, the Admiral's spending almost half of every day talking to the public.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. That's not something that was common when I was young.
Lots of interviews I can find with the Admiral on it.
Then, I went my first 20 years where nobody knew who the chief of the defense staff was, the commander of the Army, commander of the Navy. Who cared? It didn't matter. And now they're in the public sphere, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're making progress. Slow, but we're making progress.
Fantastic. Any parting words before we move on from this topic?
Time for lunch?
Time for lunch. You heard it here first. Not only are we solving the world's problems, we're also eating. And as 2 Italians, we know we're going to be eating well. So thank you, Chuck, for another wonderful podcast.
Thank you, Marty.